Jeff winked at me. He loved to wink. Plus, I saw him checking out my boobs. Laura did not usually use the word boobs or any other less than clinical term to describe her own anatomy. Reddish streaks appeared in her cleavage as though her boobs themselves couldn't quite believe the attention they'd received. "He totally has a crush on you," Jeff said, crossing his legs and leaning toward Laura's desk. "It was really cute." "Sorry I missed it." I pulled my lunch out of the bag and lined up all the items on my desk. Tuna fish sandwich, lemon-flavored iced tea, chocolate chip cookie. "Do all your students really call you Miss Reagan?" I asked. She puffed out her lips and tapped her finger against them. "Yeah, I guess so. Why, what do yours call you? Amy?" "Mostly they don't call me anything unless they need something. They just point, usually," I said, twisting the bottle of iced tea on the desk. It made a chalky sound, and Jeff and Laura both stood up to put on their jackets. "Sorry, guys, didn't mean to drive you out." I took a bite of my sandwich. They both waved. I wondered when Jeff had last had sex, if that sort of thing was hard to come by in a town so small. Maybe he met people at the gym. He was always talking about going to the gym. When Jeff had first moved out from the East Coast, he'd been slender, like a dancer. He'd always had a really lovely long neck. Now his neck just seemed like another part of his body. He was starting to look more like the locals, and more like we could have been related. After they were gone, I ate my lunch and then brushed my teeth in the bathroom. On Thursdays, I taught my beginning creative writing course. I had 25 freshmen, most of whom were disinclined to believe me when I said that poetry didn't have to rhyme and that stories didn't have to have morals at the end. We sat around several large tables that had been pushed together sometime in the early 1980s, some years before my students were born. The room had no windows and smelled vaguely of body odor. It got worse in the spring, when the layers began to come off, like my students were 25 little onions all waiting patiently to make me cry. Paul sat on the other end of the table, directly across from me. There were other kids on his right and other kids on his left, but Paul was in the middle. Sometimes I closed my eyes and pretended that the other students vanished into thin air. Not forever, but just for a few minutes. Long enough for me to walk around the table and get a closer look without any distractions. The blackboard was on his side of the room, and I liked to use it to write out announcements that I just as easily could have sent in an email. If I was on that side of the room, I could look down at the part of his blonde hair and the straight line of his nose. His side of the room never smelled like feet or farts or armpits. He smelled like cheap shampoo. I imagined him walking down the aisles of a drugstore, unscrewing bottles to sniff their contents. He would close his eyes, picture fields of lavender, buckets of April rain, orange groves. "Who knows what onomatopoeia means?" I asked the class, scratching the chalk against the blackboard. They sat in stunned silence, staring at the blank pages of their notebooks as if hoping to find the answer written there. Paul looked at me over his shoulder, pale eyebrows raised. I guessed that he was 18, 19 at the most. Some nights I lay awake thinking, he could have taken a few years off after high school. He could be 20. That would only put 7 years between us. 7 wasn't much. But he wasn't 20. He was a teenager. Things that happen in 7 years. Brad Pitt in Tibet. The itch. "Buzz," I said, looking at Paul and smiling. "Whir. Fizz. Glug." He turned back around and dutifully copied down the spelling. I used a red pen to mark the students' work. Mostly they wrote about being in college or their hometowns, which were usually towns in either Ohio or Pennsylvania with a few stoplights and no hope for the future. Some of them enjoyed reading. These were the troublemakers. They'd stop using punctuation and stop making sense and think that they were Kerouac, or worse yet, Faulkner. Sometimes I would use a smiley face to let them know I was still being encouraging. I put polite check marks in random places on the rest of the pages and stuck them together with a paperclip. Rebecca sat next to Paul and was my enemy. She turned in handwritten poems about broken hearts, grade school mush. If Laura or Jeff had been her teacher,